afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our May 18th, Tuesday, special board meeting. We'd like to begin our meetings per usual by standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we will commence our meeting. And with that said, I'd like to make a motion to move to executive session.
Second.
You're on mute.
Second.
All in favor?
Discussion?
I don't know if there's discussion on a motion to go to executive session, but you're welcome to have the floor and feel free to speak your mind. Thank you, Trustee Polaro.
Sure. I just am hopeful and wondering, we're going to go into executive session to hear what the lawyers have to say, but then we're going to be coming back out of executive session to have an open forum discussion. Is that correct with Mr. Hartnett?
I don't know, Trustee Polaro. I actually did not call the meeting. Whatever you'd like to do is fine by me, but I guess we'll find out more information in executive session.
Okay, then can I ask what the stated purpose for going into executive session is?
It would be to discuss personnel and legal matters.
So we do have, all right, so personnel and legal matters.
Yes, that's correct.
I believe Vince Toomey is joining us. I don't know if he is has the link yet. Kat, did you send the link to Vince?
Yes, of course I did.
Okay, thank you, dear. Yep. I'm just going to, because he was going to be on today, so let me just make sure he's connecting.
Because Ken, if I'm not mistaken, executive session is for a stated purpose, correct? It's not, we can't just go into executive session to go into executive session.
Yes, there are enumerated reasons to go into executive session. One of them would be matters which imperil the public safety, which is not the case. Any matter which may disclose the identity of a law enforcement agent or informer, that's not the case. Investigation
would be for obviously personnel matters and legal matters. So you can check to see if that's appropriate.
And Charlene, I sent it again to him, to Vince.
But legal matters in the form of lawsuits and all of that, yes, that is legal matters, but that's not what we are discussing today. And I'm not sure how personnel fits into this. So I want to make sure that we are going into executive session for the proper reasons.
Well, let me say that I had a conversation with Vince Toomey, who had a conversation with Ed Hartnett. And based on what Vince had informed me, and since Mr. Hartnett's report has already been made public, it's appropriate to have the portion of the meeting in which you discuss with Mr. Hartnett, whatever your questions are, Q&A for lack of a better word, is okay and appropriate for open session. But when you get to the point where you're looking for legal advice from Vince Toomey and myself concerning some of the recommendations and how they can be implemented, or what are the legal consequences of implementing them, or how they can be implemented legally, those would be conversations that would be appropriate in a closed session. And technically, I mean, everybody would call it going into executive session to get legal advice. It's technically not an executive session. It's really an exemption from the open meetings law. So when you meet with your attorney to get legal advice, although there is one reason to go into executive session to discuss pending litigation, that's fine. But if you're just getting general legal advice from your counsel, it really is a suspension of the open meetings law, and it falls under an exemption for any matters that are made confidential by federal or state law. And in New York State, conversations with your attorney are confidential. So it's a hyper-technical distinction I'm drawing there.
Okay, so my understanding was we were going to be briefed by the consultant, Mr. Hartnett, on his report, because we were briefed a little over a week and a half ago by the task force. So I don't think this is an executive session issue because we're not seeking legal advice. We're here to get briefed by the person who created the report, who wasn't able to give us any information prior till today. So do we need to go into executive session, or can this be an open Q&A, which I think it is a public document. It was paid for by public money between the Board of Trustees and the Ed Hartnett Group. I just don't know why the executive session, unless anyone particularly here on this board feels that they have something that could imperil the village.
Mark, those are excellent points, and I really appreciate you bringing those up. 2 quick points. When we spoke to the village administrator and clerk, she informed us that a meeting was being called. Again, I didn't call the meeting, but the meeting protocol was to open the meeting and then to adjourn into executive session and then go into public session. That was the request, which is why we're here today. But specifically, one reason to go to executive session would be to discuss personnel matters. And so, for example, if we're looking at overtime, for example, that would be, and discuss specific personnel, that would be an executive session matter. We have Vince Toomey, our labor counsel here, who is going to provide us counsel about labor. And therefore, that also is an executive session item. We've been to executive session a number of times, and so I think all of our board knows exactly what is done and not done in executive session. Everyone knows I'm more of a purist, and so I like to have everything in the public session. I've actually disagreed with our board in going to executive session. I believe that everything, when possible, should be done publicly and transparently. But in this particular case, given that we will be speaking about personnel and we'll be speaking about legal matters with our labor counsel, which is why he's here, it seems appropriate to go into executive session. And again, that is why the meeting was called, and that was the direction given by our clerk and administrator. Charlene, I don't know if you're here, but she can provide some guidance. It doesn't look like I see her
I'm
here.
here.
So Charlene,
I'm
what,
here.
you maybe tell us about the process of why we're having a meeting today and
Well, there
purpose
was the Q&A portion with Mr. Hartnett. According, I had a conference earlier today with both Vince and Ken, and last week. General questions or general presentations on the anything to do with the report itself can certainly, and the recommendations can be discussed in an open session. However, the reason why we were immediately going to go to exec session was to basically have labor counsel advise as to what can and can't be discussed in open session regarding the report.
Ken Gray here. May I chime in for a second? As been pointed out, Mr. Hartnett's report has already been made public. So I think it is appropriate to have that conversation in public. The Q&A that the trustees have requested. Vince, I kind of chimed in a little bit early before you logged on, and I hope I didn't mischaracterize any conversation you may have had with Mr. Hartnett, but my understanding is that he is of the understanding that this is a work session with the Board of Trustees, so the public is viewing it, but they are not actively participating. They're not able to chime in and ask direct questions of the trustees or Mr. Hartnett. Is that accurate, Mr. Toomey?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I was able to confer with both Ed and Ken today and Charlene. And I believe that the way this should work, and I'm glad, are we in executive session now? And I apologize.
No.
For being a little late. All right, so I'll just talk in general terms. There are portions of this discussion that might be appropriate for an executive session, specifically if the board seeks legal advice on what recommendations from Mr. Hartnett can or cannot be implemented. That's something that would require legal advice from both the village attorney and myself. If it's simply the Q&A about the contents of the report, since the report is already public, it would be totally appropriate to have that done in a work session like this. Mr. Hartnett indicated, and I agree with him, it would be inappropriate for him to be entertaining questions or comments from the general public. But the Q&A portion of this can be done in an open session. And then to the extent there are issues from any of the trustees on what can and cannot be implemented, then either the village attorney or I would indicate that to the board that there's a need to go into executive session to discuss that. And we could either do that as things progress or after Mr. Hartnett finishes his presentation, then we can have a separate executive session to discuss the implementation of any of those recommendations. So I sort of see a little bit of a bifurcated proceeding here, where there's first a presentation from Ed, and then to the extent anything requires advice of counsel, then the board we would recommend at least that the board go into executive session to hear legal advice from either Ken and or me on those topics.
Okay, so I guess again, I mean, we do not have yet a briefing from Ed. We do not have recommendations from Ed that we could implement. Is the need to go into executive session now, where again, we don't know what we will be asking or hearing, or do we want to have the briefing and then as questions arise, if there are things that are, you know, a no-go in it, then council can let us know, and that could be tabled to executive session.
I leave that to the mayor and trustees' discretion on how they want to operate procedurally. Well, I would indicate that again, if it's simply questions to and from Mr. Hartnett, then that's fine for an open discussion. To the extent anything borders on legal advice, either advice that I gave or Ken gave to the board or to Mr. Hartnett as the consultant, then we would give you a signal that that would be executive session material, in which case you could immediately go into executive session, or you can pre-plan, and this might be a neater approach, pre-plan after Ed finishes, that there would be an executive session at which time the mayor and trustees could pose questions to council about what recommendations could be implemented. So perhaps start with a public portion or continue with a public portion, knowing in advance that any questions that the board may have of council should be reserved to an executive session to immediately follow the public presentation.
Thank you, Vince. I think that's the right way to go based on what we've just heard. And being briefed by the consultant is very important for this board, since we weren't able to do it until today.
Thank you, Vince. I just want to also say I look forward to hearing Ed, and I know the public is as well. So I do want to just see if we can have both a open forum and a closed door forum, so we can have all of our questions answered in a legal and fair capacity. Thanks.
All right, so just so we're clear on that, so to the extent there are questions that would be posed to council, those will be reserved to the executive session if this is the will of the mayor and trustees. And if Ken and I see areas that would require legal advice, then we'll give some type of signal to the board that you should either reserve those or go into an executive session if it's something that requires immediate advice. Does that work, Mayor?
Well, I think that's why wasn't it set to go right into executive session just for that reason, so we don't have to go back and forth, just like we did with the task force. I mean, that's the way this was planned today, because we were going to have questions for the attorneys.
But I
So
think
I don't
Trustee
understand why
Arrested,
now you want to change it.
well, I think Trustee Arrested, the difference is here is that last presentation we had by the task force hadn't been to the public yet. We hadn't received the Ed Hartnett report. Now that everything is open and transparent, there was no reason to go with executive session unless there are some legal matters that Vince and or Attorney Gray would signal to say that is something to discuss behind closed doors. So I believe right now, because everything has been out in the open already, there's no reason to go into executive session, but I believe that the public deserves to hear from Mr. Hartnett himself first, and any other questions that might arise out of his brief that gets to a point where it is teetering on legal. I believe we have two great minds here that would be able to tell us that that's something for exec.
If I
Trustee
may-
Parrish, again, oh,
Parrish.
sorry, Vince.
I'm sorry, Mayor, go ahead.
I say Trustee Parrish makes excellent points, and he always does every meeting. And the point here is this is simply procedural. We wholeheartedly agree. We want everything in the public domain. That's exactly what we do. We should deliberate in the public domain, and we should discuss. But ultimately, we want to make sure that we aren't going back and forth, like the deputy mayor said, and that was pre-planned. That was the instructions that we were given. So it seemed like there's, for whatever reason, there's a last minute change as to whether not to go into executive session first. We've done this many times in the past before. So it'd be nice just to get all on the same page so we can ask those legal questions to you as well. We could ask those personnel questions to you, and then we don't have to go back and forth. It's also very hard for Kat to do it as well as the pausing and stopping on YouTube as we're on Zoom here. It's simply procedural, but Trustee Parrish makes excellent points. Everything should be in the public domain. We want complete transparency. We wholeheartedly agree with you. And we would just like to stick to the schedule as it was pre-planned and as given to us by our village clerk and administrator.
As long as we're all in agreement that we are going to come out into public session and be able to have that Q&A, and if the board agrees with that, then that's something I think we could consider. But again, there's a little bit of confusion, and Vince Toomey laid it out in a good way, and so did Ken. So we're not trying to stop the process. We're just trying to get the right information.
Okay, thank you. So I'm glad we all agree just to do this, and then we can go back to public and we can do Q&A and however long we all can stay. And again, thank you for those excellent comments and thank you to the board.
So we would need a motion to go into the executive session if that has not happened yet.
We have
can
a
remake
motion
the
and a
mo-
second.
We have a motion and a second. We just need a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
All right, thank you, everybody. We have now returned to public session. The time is 4:51 p.m. No resolutions were passed during the executive session. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. We have Ed Hartnett here, and before we turn it over to him, I just wanted to make a brief mention and wanted to thank our entire board for being here and thank Mr. Hartnett, as well as Vince Toomey, our labor counsel, and Ken Gray, our attorney, for being here. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that everyone knows that our board doesn't always agree, but there are a few things that we do agree on. And one of those things is that we all support our Southampton Village Police Department. And we all want to make sure that we have the best possible department in the county and the East End, and that our department has all and ample of the resources that they need. We make sure that they have the best technology and they have the appropriate and best training. I also wanted to add that we all agree, and this is one of the few things our boards agree on, we all agree that we really, that we are behind and support our dispatchers, and we all support them. In fact, we all agree that our dispatchers are so good, this is a department that other East End villages want to emulate. And so we want to make it very clear that we support our Southampton Village Police Department and our dispatchers. Now, of course, we made the effort to put together a task force and to hire the Ed Hartnett Consulting Group because there is always room for improvement. And we want to make sure that our operations are the best that they can be and that our village can be even safer. So today, we just wanted to clarify that there are two different reports. There were two groups. Our board, the majority of the members of our board, including the liaison to the police department, agreed to appoint a task force to review our police department and to pull some results from the Ed Hartnett report. We also hired Ed Hartnett, an excellent consultant who has tremendous law enforcement experience, to review our operations of our police department. Now, those reports are different. While there are also some similarities and some where the task force was pulled from the HeartNet report, but naturally there are two separate groups. One was a task force, one was a consultant overviewing our operations, and so naturally there's going to be differences. Specifically, differences related to detectives that was offered by the task force, and then secondly, differences in our dispatchers. Again, we all support our dispatchers, and there were differences in conclusions as to detectives and the dispatchers, as well as some other issues, including but not limited to policies on off-duty employment. So in conclusion, what I think is needed, and I think what we all would agree, is that we do need a new approach to make our department better and our village safer. Because while we do a lot of things that are great, we do need a new approach because some of the old ways are no longer working. And one of those things, for example, that we can do is update our technology for the new blotter, for a blotter reporting system. So with that being said, I wanted to turn this over to Ed HeartNet. And again, wanted to thank both our Southampton Village Police Department, as well as our dispatchers. And then also wanted to recognize, again, the good work that our board is doing. And I appreciate all of us working together. And then lastly, I just want to say that this is an opportunity for us to listen to Ed HeartNet, who's a highly experienced and well-respected consultant in the law enforcement field. But this is not an opportunity today to attack volunteers who have given their time and have dedicated it to the village despite not being law enforcement professionals. So thank you. I'll turn this over to you, Mr. HeartNet.
Thank you, Mayor. First, let me start out by saying thank you and thank the trustees in the village for letting me be involved in this worthy project. I'm going to refer to some notes that I have here. But first, again, I want to thank the folks in the village office, especially Miranda and Charlene, for all their help and guidance throughout this whole thing. I want to thank Chief Tom Cummings and the police department for being so open and professional with us and cooperative with us throughout this project. I want to thank the members of the task force. As you mentioned, Mayor, they're volunteers. They put the time and effort in to do this job. And folks, thank you for taking the time to let me speak today. Again, as the mayor pointed out, the task force seemed to have one view maybe of what our report contained. I'd like to hopefully clear up any confusion, misconceptions regarding that report. Frankly, we briefed the task force, and I thought that the task force was now going to take that briefing and give it to the trustees. I was mistaken. That's probably my fault. But anyway, I'm hoping that whatever comes up, I'll answer any questions that anybody has about the report. I have to apologize. My partner on this, Dr. Jim McCabe, is not available. He's a nationally regarded expert on staffing and workload allocation, resource analysis. So I'll do my best to answer any in the weeds question, but really Jim can probably handle a lot of those better than me. Most of the task force briefing that I saw, and I watched it several times on YouTube, was accurate, was consistent with our report. Most of it was, I would say. Some points were delivered in language probably not consistent with our report. A casual observer might listen to the task force briefing and say, we recommend this, we recommend that. Sounds like it's coming from us, and maybe it wasn't. Some comments were delivered in a manner that maybe reflected the task force point of view, but not our point of view. Some key points I thought probably should have been highlighted and they weren't. Some task force comments simply were not accurate, or maybe were misstated or not consistent with our report. I think it's important that our report be delivered in its most purest form. And I strongly recommend that everyone get beyond the executive summary and actually read the report. So if I may just go into some specifics, and the mayor kind of alluded to some of these already, we did not recommend getting rid of the detective division. Frankly, we thought it should be downsized a bit. We should be reformulated, reformatted, a detective sergeant working with 2 detectives. But we did not recommend giving out detective work to what was referred to as a superior agency. I don't use the term superior agency. Using a term like that infers that the agency that we're talking about is an inferior agency, which is not the case here. I would never disrespect the Southampton Village Police Department in such a way. We also did not recommend contracting out the dispatch function. Frankly, we saw it as well-staffed, well-equipped. Even in the executive summary, it says we recommend more hands-on oversight. There are issues there with sick leave and overtime. We think they could be fixed. Frankly, the dispatchers and the dispatch center seem to be a very capable group. We didn't mention anything about the chief's contract. That was part of the task force opening. It was not in the purview of our study. The task force also mentioned when we talked about off-duty employment, the task force said reportedly the chief has an involvement in a security firm. It's the first I've heard of it. I didn't have, I don't know anything about the chief having any involvement in any security firm. That came from the task force, not from us. Regarding off-duty employment, we wanted to close what we saw was a loophole. There's a section in the current off-duty employment policy that says the chief can approve use of equipment and vehicles while conducting off-duty employment. From what we hear, it rarely happens. It's not routine. I don't think it's happened in quite a while, but we thought it was a loophole, should be closed. The impression was given, I think, during the task force briefing that it happens all the time, and it doesn't, from what we heard. There was also mention of detectives commuting with the vehicles. Again, not something that was in our report. Again, if that's a separate task force report, then maybe they'll issue their own report. I don't know, but that's not something that was in our report. Frankly, the task force mentioned that the chief approves off-duty employment, as he should. I was an agency head. I approved off-duty employment. Who else should approve it? The chief should approve it. We have no problem with that segment of the policy at all. There was mention of political activity. The agency has a solid political activity section in its manual as far as prohibitions on on-duty members engaging in political activity. We heard anecdotally that this policy is sometimes ignored. The task force apparently took that one step further and saying there should be an investigation conducted. We never recommended any investigation. We heard this anecdotally. We just think that more attention should probably be paid during election season to make sure that the members understand what the rules are when it comes to political activity on duty. There was also, when it came to hiring, we think obviously that the department has to spend more time and maybe additional effort in recruiting persons of color to join the men and women of the Southampton Village Police Department. We didn't mention anything about a nepotism case, but that was apparently highlighted by the task force about a white male candidate that was hired over a more qualified African-American candidate. It's not something we would delve into. It's not something that we would comment on, but the task force recommends an investigation of that. We do not recommend any investigations in our report. On oversight, a key element of what we recommended was left out. We think, again, no disrespect to Trustee McLaughlin, the current police liaison, but we think it's a system that was inherited by everybody. It's been passed along over the years, and we think that a larger body should be looking at everything that has to do with the police department. We recommend, in essence, a police board. The task force recommended that the board be the trustees. Our recommendation is that the board be chaired by the mayor and staffed by all 4 trustees. That's a more effective board. That's a more effective management mechanism than simply passing it on, spreading it from 1 trustee to 4. We think something like that, with an agenda, with a monthly meeting, with accountability, with any topic that can be covered, wants to be covered, the village wants to know about, have a meeting with the chief and his people every month and get to the bottom of everything. I think it's a much more effective way to manage. And frankly, it's not fair in the current system to have that lay on 1 person. We think real oversight will come from this rather than what was suggested by the task force. What was left out was one of the most important recommendations we made was left out. It was also covered in the Police Reform Committee, which we also studied. It's also included as an addendum to our report, is body cameras. Uh, I know it's easy for me to snap my fingers and say, get body cameras. You folks have to do the hard work of getting the money to fund it. But the police department, to its credit, had a pilot program that ended in July of 19. By everyone we spoke to, they're ready to go. They're ready to do it. Whatever the stumbling block is for body cameras, folks, I strongly recommend get rid of it and get body cam. It's becoming the national standard. Body cameras, you have to have 3 components for good body camera system. You need good equipment, including ample storage. You need a good policy, and you need good training. If any one of those 3 things are missing, your policy will likely fail. I've seen it on consulting projects I've done in the past. So with all due respect, get body cameras, sooner rather than later. One thing also that was not stressed, and I think it's important to note when it comes to the work done by the men and women of the Southampton Village Police Department is they embrace a full service model. They pride themselves on handling everything. Frankly, I was surprised on the level of things that they handle. And I'm not saying that in a demeaning way in any way. Frankly, quite the opposite. I say it in a very respectful way. That if you're a resident in Southampton Village and you call the police for anything, which places where I work, I would say, wow, that's pretty crazy. They handle it. And they're proud of the fact they handle it. So when you call them, they respond, they handle it. I think that should have been stressed a little bit more, and it wasn't. I know there was a lot of praise given at the outset of the task force briefing about the cops, and rightfully so. But I think we should keep that in mind, that model is in place, and I would hope that the baby doesn't get thrown out with the bathwater. On the diversity front, again, I kind of mentioned it with the hiring. Again, I think there was too much time spent in the task force briefing on this unsubstantiated claim of nepotism. It hasn't been investigated. I don't know. That's up to you folks if you want to investigate something like that. But to me, the larger issue is that the department needs to diversify, and better efforts have to be done when it comes to recruitment and hiring, and how you get the folks to be more reflective of the people they serve. On patrol, again, something I think that should have been emphasized more is we think that there's significant improvement that could be made when you look at again, Jim McCabe's an expert on this. When you look at the patrol shifts, they're not working as many hours as other officers in the state. There's shifts that can be explored, 12-hour shift perhaps, where actually you'll probably get more coverage, you'll get more hours, and you also, some of these tours, believe it or not, the police would like probably better than the tours they're doing now. So I think if all sides get together, next time collective bargaining comes up, I think that a more effective set of shifts for the cops can be worked out, and it may make everybody happy, which I know doesn't happen often in government. Just to conclude, folks, and then of course I'll take whatever questions you have. Again, I strongly suggest please read the report. Anybody that wants to classify this report as a defund the police report is seriously mistaken. It is certainly not that. To us, it's an objective assessment of this agency, and again, with strong recommendations for oversight from the village. We think it's a roadmap. It's a roadmap for the village, for the mayor, for the trustees, for the chief, for the cops, for the community to all work together. I think if everybody could put their political differences aside and do the right thing for the village, I think it can happen. There's a lot of pot stirrers always out there on all sides. I think maybe they're getting too much play, and the good solid people out there probably just want some good things to happen. They like their cops. They like the way the cops are being policed, being managed to a point, but there's things that have to be done to improve it. We think, basically, to not get too stale here, but we think we provided the tools to fix the house, not the tools to tear it down. The noble profession of policing is still in my blood, and I think this can get done. And again, I thank you for your time today, folks, and I'll answer any questions you have, hopefully.
Thank you, Ed. We really appreciate it. That definitely helps clarify. I'm actually very happy and almost relieved that you had the opportunity to do this because you were able to kind of present what you called, the objective report. And I also would recommend to the public and to the board and to everybody interested to read this detailed report. It's got a lot of great recommendations, and I'm hoping to work together with our board of trustees in order to put together a plan to take to make our department a better, safer, and stronger department. And I'm looking forward to having that opportunity to work with our board. And with that said, I'd love to open this up for any questions from trustees and members of the board.
Hi, thank you. Ed, I want to thank you so much. This has been a marathon over the last 2 hours. I appreciate your patience and, getting to listen to us. But, you have a very impressive record of studying police, along with your history of being an officer and then chief of NYPD in Yonkers, and, you have an esteemed record. You did extensive work on this. I know you put in much more hours than what you charged us, and I appreciate that, and thank you, and that is very appreciated. But I want to just really get to the point is that it sort of shocks me that you weren't presenting first, because when I hear what you say tonight versus what we were presented a week and a half ago, it's troubling because it got out to the public that our police department is, for quote unquote, in crisis. And would you characterize our police department as being in crisis?
No, I know the word crisis gets thrown around a lot, especially when you're talking about, federal government. But no, I think, again, I think it's like if I was still sitting in the chair in Yonkers as police commissioner and consultants came in, they would find some things that, would probably need to be fixed. It's funny when you talk about police reform, some people think all departments need the same amount of reform. That's like saying every car needs 4 new tires. Some cars obviously do need 4 new tires. I think some just need maybe a checkup of the tires. So yeah, it's a silly analogy, but I think you get my point. I don't think it's an agency in crisis. I think this stuff can be fixed. Okay. I think with determined leadership, I think Chief Cummings and his people have the skill set to do it. I think if the village oversight plan, which we recommend, gets put into place, and it's going to be tough going at first and a lot of work, but I think this stuff is imminently fixable.
Right. Yeah, because basically we're adapting, and that's part of the police reform, is adapting to the environment we're in today, and it's one of the reasons why I voted to bring the HeartNet group on, to really get our police department stronger, more efficient. It's like anything that any business would go through. So your work you put in the time, and I appreciate that. The thing that confuses me the most is, you did not get to see the task force report before it was presented. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I didn't know there was a report, frankly. I didn't know they did
you
a
had
report.
no idea.
I thought they were doing just a brief. I thought they were passing on my briefing to the trustees.
Right. And I know when I contacted you via email one time that I'd asked you, and you said all trustee inquiries were to be presented to the head of the task force. I did not vote for the task force because I was a strong believer that, an agency between the board who engaged in agreement with you and the consultant, you could get things lost in translation. And I think we heard that today, is that, things were lost in translation and things were at some point misleading. And, that is something that I'm so happy that you were able to come and clarify. There's a lot of different things I can talk about, but, really at the end of the day, we do want to make a better, stronger police department. And, your recommendations are definitely going to be looked at, and they are recommendations, correct? That's one of the things that you keep on. And again, this was probably spun a little bit. Your report was spun by the task force. It seems that way from the way that you have mentioning things, that, it wasn't necessarily accurate. And, I want the public to know that, Ed Hartnett's group has done these reports all across the country. And is this the first time you've ever had a group in between you and a government agency?
Yeah, yes, it is. It's the first time, again, usually if a government entity is if we're contracted with a government entity, we deal with somebody directly in the government. So in this case, there was an intermediary between us and government. And
it was quite confusing at times, I'm sure, to try and figure out, what you're doing versus what you're reporting. And then finally, at the end of the day, what was reported, according to the task force, when they said this directly came from the Ed Hartnett report. So I'm just glad you were able to get up here and speak about that. And, we do have an accredited police department. I think the public needs to know that. Now, Ed, you can probably help me with numbers, but there are 18,000 police departments in the country, I think. And only about 500 to 1,000 are accredited. Is that probably like a good scenario of what it is?
I'd say that's probably fairly accurate. Yeah, getting state accreditation. You know, I was involved in a state accreditation process in Yonkers, and it's not easy, and you have to get it done. You have to renew it every couple of years. It's not the panacea. It's not perfect, but
Right.
you know, it's certainly better to be accredited than not be accredited.
Right. And we are accredited.
Yes, you are. Yes, you're the Southampton Village Police Department is New York State accredited. Yes.
Correct. And it's something that's never really come out. So I want to commend the police department on that because, as you just stated, it is not easy to get a department accredited.
It's not. And actually, it's, you know, I have right in front of me on page 3 in the executive summary, we mentioned that, you know, the SVPD has been a New York State accredited agency since 1993.
And that's an incredible run. And I think it's something that we should be really, proud of. So I want to let that be known to the public that we are not, something that this department's taken itself seriously. I mean, I've lived here all my life, so I do have a history of, knowing how the police department functions. Again, can we adapt? Absolutely. Will this board look at all the recommendations? Absolutely. But Ed, I want to thank you for your time, and I appreciate you being straightforward and clarifying some of the things that have really gotten confused out in the public.
Thank you, sir.
Ed, if I may, first of all, just to echo the mayor's points and trustee Parrish's points, thank you for your time and your months of work, you and both Mr. McCabe, and obviously it was a very, very big endeavor with a small window of time. I just want to clarify a few points you made. You mentioned emphatically that you were not in favor of getting rid of the dispatch. Now, in your opinion, how did the opinion of the task force become part of the larger issue? Meaning, how was that recommendation so skewed from your own report? Do you think?
Yeah, I was confused by that, Joe. I don't understand it, unless it's something that they used our information about some of the overtime issues there and made their own conclusion. And that's fair if they want to make their own conclusion. I just didn't want anybody reading this report or anybody viewing that briefing on YouTube to think that recommendation came from us. It did not.
Correct. And thank you for clarifying that point. And also, you also did mention a few things about overtime, and obviously those things should be addressed by this board in due time. But also, at what point do you think, looking back, do you think that more time should have been needed, or do you think that could you have used more time to talk to the chief or talk to the tenants or what have you? I know you mentioned to us that you did speak with them for several hours, for quite a bit of time. However, is there anything that could have been missed? Again, lost in translation, as during this past week with COVID, it was difficult to always get together and have a conversation. So I'm curious to know at what point more good things be lost. And again, this is not a reflection on you. It's more of the time crunch we were in this winter. So I guess what I'm saying is, could you have used more time to understand the department better? Or do you think you got a pretty good synopsis over the last few months?
I think we got a pretty good synopsis. Listen, I mean, looking back in 2020 hindsight, we could always think, oh, maybe we should have talked to a couple more people here, a couple more people there. But the reality is, we spent, I'd say, significantly over 200 hours on a report that we contracted for 160 hours. So not that it's all about dollars and cents and hours, but we spent quite a bit of time. But looking back, we could probably have spent some more time with speaking to individuals. However, again, as I mentioned, we sat with the chief. We were in, ongoing contact over the course of the project with the chief by phone or email. We interviewed the captain. We interviewed each lieutenant twice. We interviewed some of the sergeants, some of the officers. So again, I'm sure there's some officers out there that probably felt a little slighted that we didn't get to them. But I think we had a pretty good feel for the agency, which is important. It's a little hard with COVID and Zoom. I mean, I'm on a project now, which it's going well, but it doesn't. Zoom is good. It's better than I thought, but it doesn't replace it doesn't always replace the face-to-face. I learned a lot riding around in a radio car with a cop as opposed to on a screen. You know, in a focus group with cops in a room rather than on a screen, I'll learn more. So, I mean, that's part of it too. But to answer your question, I think we had ample time. But you know, I guess looking back, we could have found a couple more people to speak to.
And with this whole miscommunication that has occurred between the task force and your organization, that occurred last week, or 2 weeks ago, as Trustee Parrish pointed out. Were you at all instructed not to debrief the chief, or how did that work out? Because obviously there was a massive miscommunication between the department and maybe us or so forth. I'm curious to know as to what the involvement was, basically what the communication was between the task force and you before their findings and your findings were presented.
As far as communication about, I'm sorry, I lost you there, Joe.
As far as the communication between the content of their presentation and your report, because again, as you said before, there was some misgivings and miscommunication. So I'm curious to know. At what, why wasn't the department heads debriefed before? Was a report offered to the department prior to it being put online? Or
yeah, Jim and I briefed Chief Cummings on the content of our report, and then we emailed him a copy. And again, you asked me about the content of the task force report. Again, I didn't know there was going to be a task force report. So, you know, I don't know what, I had no idea there was going to be a report. Again, I thought they were presenting our findings to the trustees. And then when I saw the thing, it was mistaken.
Said, and again, as you alluded to, what they said wasn't exactly what you wrote in your report, and that's why you're here today. So I wanted to clarify that point for the public as well.
Gotcha.
Hey guys, can I say something real quick? At 5:30, I have to log into a ZBA on this Zoom. So is there any way we can end this very quickly?
Okay, I'd just like to say that the task force, they were all highly qualified professionals, and their job was to make recommendations based on the report. So those were their recommendations, not necessarily the HeartNet report recommendations. So they had some recommendations of their own. And although the chief, according to the HeartNet report, you didn't find anything about him having his own security firm. Yes, he does. That's on record with Suffolk County. So I know there are some things in their report, and I don't think we should just dismiss the task force and the group of volunteers that work very hard on this.
But again, that
like we're trying
makes
to
it sound like it
job
came
on
from
them
my
today.
report.
Pardon me?
My issue with it was, it was conveyed in a manner which says reportedly the chief has an interest in a security firm.
Mhm.
So anybody watching it might think that's coming from me, and it's not. And I was not even made aware that the task force was making their own recommendations. I was told to brief the task force, and they were going to pass it on to the trustees, and that didn't happen. So,
Well, that was part of their job, was to make recommendations.
I wish they would have told me.
Mhm.
I would like to know, well, first and foremost, they may be all highly qualified in their individual fields. From a perspective of what they were asked to do, Ed Hartnett, and I believe that it would be, again, I would have loved to have heard from him first, because I think we got a lot better information on someone who has qualifications in law enforcement. So we do that. I would love to know where then the information that was provided to the task force came from so that they could make these recommendations. I know that there's a blog out there, on Southampton Police and stuff like that. I'm just wondering where these guys may have gotten their ideas. And I think at some stage it even says photographic evidence of police officers. If that's not from Ed Hartnett, where is it? Where did they get all of this information that they used in their recommendations, which were a combination supposedly of Ed and theirs, and then being presented under the auspices of the Ed Hartnett group? that to me is very troubling. And again, I do thank them for their time and their effort, but a combination of that, very, very, very troubling. One of the things, Mr. Hartnett, you mentioned, and I thank you for that, the superiority agency, and saying that, that's not a word you would necessarily use, but it was used in the recommendations. And so I wanted to, thank you for putting that out there. Also, when you said about the blotter reporting and all of that, I know that at some stage in the very near future, I think it's niche is the new blotter reporting that is going to come to our police department. And in fact, one of our officers was very involved in creating that with I believe Suffolk County is one of the ones that are doing it. So I thank them for their time in it.
Mr. Pilar, if I could just clarify that too. A records management system that they're going to put in place will help by leaps and bounds in a lot of this stuff. A lot of the overtime controls, a lot of the sick stuff, a lot of the statistical stuff, the response times, even as we mentioned in the detective side, the case management component, a lot of that stuff can be incorporated into a good records management system. So I think that stuff is going to go a long way in implementing and highlighting some of the stuff that we've mentioned in our report.
Absolutely. And I think that's again where this adaptation needs to occur. And I think that is something that, that we need to do. I mean, because you did a report for Yonkers, correct? And a lot of these same issues have come up there.
No, I actually, no, I was the police commissioner of Yonkers. So when I got to Yonkers, I saw some things that we had to fix. So yeah, so I did my best to implement some of this stuff. Yes.
To try and implement some of these things there and stuff like that. And so, I mean, I think that is, again, it's something to know, it's something to look at, and it's something to try and move forward to. And again, I think the clarification from you being here, is greatly helpful in my mind.
Thank you very much, Trustee Pilaro. Are there any other comments from the board or questions? If not, I just wanted to thank, well, I'll see if there's any other questions or comments. Okay. That being said, I just wanted to thank our board for being on this public meeting today. Wanted to thank Ed Hartnett, as he said, he was well over the number of hours that he had contracted with us. So wanted to thank you for your hard work and then for coming out again. This was, we really appreciate your hard work and dedication to this project. And I know our board appreciates it. And wanted to thank Vince for being with us. He doesn't always come to our meetings. And then lastly, as we conclude, again, just wanted to thank our Southampton Village Police Department. We've been working very closely together to address the speeding going on in the village, and they've stepped up and done an excellent job. We've got officers out on foot doing a speeding check. We've been working with some of our top-ranking officers to really set good standards, as this is one problem that has plagued us. So with that being said, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, I just, could I have one more quick question to Mr. Hartnett about just the manuals, if I may?
Sure.
Apologies. And I will
No
try
problem.
and make it very quick so we can keep Kat on schedule. The manuals that are being used and that are in place, again, as an accredited village, I mean, we have to follow those policies and manuals that are being put in place, correct? And then it's even harder when it comes to reaccreditation because you have to show that you are following those policies.
You have to show that you have policies, but our recommendations on the manual was that the format is unwieldy. It's a little confusing. So we recommend a change in format and some of the content needs to be updated.
But isn't that, I mean, that is done with the accreditation, right? The policies and stuff. Because I mean, the ones that we have, I believe, are updated every time a new one comes out with the.
No, that's not accurate.
IACP.
I'm sorry. So I know we're pressed for time. That's not accurate. You have to show you have a policy. You don't have to show you have a policy that's been updated. So some of the policies in the manual go back, 10, 12 years. So they just need a fresh look. And again, the format is a little tough. So again, it's not a terrible manual. I had to do the same thing when I got to Yonkers. My manual was horrible. This is better than that, but it still needs to be updated content-wise and format-wise, in our opinion.
But it is under IACP, correct? Which is the national and the New York State.
No, ICP is the International Association of Chiefs of Police. So the Southampton Village is a New York State accredited agency. It does follow accreditation standards, but again, those standards require a policy, not necessarily an updated policy.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you, Trustee Polaro. With that said, would like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
Stay
All in
safe,
favor?
folks.
aye.
All right.
Aye.